The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached my father's headstone, the simple bouquet of white lilies feeling heavy in my hand. But I stopped short. Someone was already there. A woman I'd never seen before was kneeling, carefully wiping away a smudge of dirt from the engraved letters of his name, her movements gentle and familiar, as if she'd done this 100 times. A fresh arrangement of expensive-looking blue hydrangeas, my father's favorite, already sat at the base of the marble. For a moment, I felt a flash of anger. This was my ritual, my time. It was the 10th anniversary of his passing, a day I always reserved for him alone. She must have heard me, because she turned. Her face was lined with a quiet sorrow, but her eyes were clear and steady. They met mine with a sad, knowing look, and she offered a small, hesitant smile. "He would be so proud of you, Liam," she said, her voice soft but firm. The words were kind, but they landed like a punch to the gut, because this woman was the one person my mother and my brother, Mark, swore my father had hated more than anyone in the world. This was Eleanor Vance, the business partner my family claimed had cheated him, ruined his career, and broken his spirit. The very reason, they said, that he'd worked himself into an early grave. Her presence here wasn't just strange, it was an insult, a desecration. My entire life, my mother had painted Eleanor as a villain, a monster responsible for all our misfortunes. And yet, here she was, tending to his grave with more care than my own mother had ever shown. You're probably wondering who this woman really was, and why her 5 simple words felt like they had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my life. To understand that, you have to understand the lie my entire existence was built on, a lie that started with a promise I made to my father on his deathbed. My family was a simple machine with 2 settings. The first was praise Mark. The second was blame Liam. My older brother, Mark, was the golden child. He had the dazzling smile, the easy charm, and a talent for spending money we didn't have. He could fail an entire semester at college, and my mother would sigh and say, "He has so much potential. He just needs to find his passion." When he crashed his first car, a gift for his 18th birthday, she said it was a valuable life lesson and promptly bought him a newer model. Mark could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, could do no right. I was the quiet one, the responsible one. While Mark was out with friends, I was the one helping my dad in his workshop, balancing the family checkbook by the time I was 16, and working an after-school job to help with bills my mother and Mark pretended didn't exist. My successes were ignored. My failures were magnified. If I got an A on a test, my mother would ask why it wasn't an A+. If I saved up enough money to buy something for myself, she'd guilt me by saying, "Think of what the family could have used that for." I was the designated scapegoat, the built-in disappointment who made Mark look shinier by comparison. My father was the only one who saw me. He was a quiet, brilliant engineer who started his own firm with his partner, Eleanor Vance. He didn't speak in grand pronouncements, but he'd put a hand on my shoulder while I was studying and say, "You've got a good head on your shoulders, son. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those small moments were my lifeline. Then, when I was 18, everything collapsed. According to my mother, Eleanor, his most trusted partner, orchestrated a hostile takeover, stole his patents, and forced him out of his own company. The betrayal shattered him. He lost his purpose. The stress consumed him, leading to a massive heart attack a year later. From my perspective, my mother's story made perfect sense. I watched my strong, capable father wither into a shadow of himself, his eyes vacant and his spirit gone. He died believing he was a failure, and I hated Eleanor Vance for it with every fiber of my being. In the sterile, beeping quiet of the hospital room, My father looked impossibly small against the white sheets. My mother and Mark were down in the cafeteria, taking a break from the stress, as they put it. It was just me and him. He motioned me closer, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. His grip was weak, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a desperate clarity. "Liam," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Promise me something." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Your mother and Mark, they don't know how the world works. They're not strong like you. You have to look after them. Promise me you'll make sure they're okay." It felt like a sacred duty, his final wish. He saw me as the strong one, the pillar. In that moment, any resentment I had for my family evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of responsibility. I was honoring him. "I promise, Dad," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'll take care of them. I won't let you down." A faint smile touched his lips, and he seemed to relax, sinking back into the pillow. He died less than an hour later. That promise became my entire identity. I dropped my plans to study engineering at a university out of state. I couldn't leave. Who would pay the mortgage? I took a job at a local construction company, working my way up from laborer to foreman through sheer grit and long hours. Every paycheck went into a joint account. I paid for my mother's bills, for Mark's endless business ideas that never panned out, for his car repairs, his rent when he decided he needed his own space to find himself. For 10 years, I sacrificed everything. I didn't date. I had no social life. I wore secondhand clothes and drove a 15-year-old truck that barely ran. My life was a repeating cycle of work, sleep, and managing the financial black hole that was my family. They saw my sacrifice not as a gift, but as their right. I was just Liam, the reliable machine that produced money, the fulfillment of a deathbed promise. They never once asked if I was okay. They never had to. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the 10th anniversary of my father's death. I came home from a 12-hour shift, covered in drywall dust and exhaustion, to find my mother and Mark sitting at the kitchen table with celebratory smiles. A bottle of expensive champagne, one I certainly didn't buy, was chilling in an ice bucket. "Wonderful news," my mother announced, her voice giddy. "Mark is engaged. To a wonderful girl, Tiffany. Her family is very prominent." Mark just grinned, holding up his fiancé's hand in a picture on his phone. A diamond the size of a small rock glittered on her finger. I offered a tired congratulations. But I knew what was coming next. "We're going to need your help for the wedding, of course," Mark said, as if ordering a coffee. "Nothing too crazy. Tiffany has her heart set on the Grand Oak Ballroom, and will need a down payment for a house in her neighborhood. A starter home there is about $500,000. So if you could just cover the 20% down payment, that would be a huge help." I did the math in my head. The wedding they were describing would cost at least $50,000. The down payment was another $100,000. They were asking me for $150,000. It was nearly every cent I had managed to scrape together over 10 years, the money I secretly hoped might one day be for my own future. For the first time, I said no. "I can't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't have that kind of money." My mother's smile vanished. "What do you mean you don't have it?" she snapped. "You never go anywhere. You never do anything. Where does all your money go?" Mark scoffed. "Don't be selfish, Liam. This is for the family. It's what Dad would have wanted." That was the line they always used, the knife they always twisted. But this time, it didn't work. I stood my ground. The argument escalated until my mother, her face contorted with rage, spat the words that finally broke the spell. "Your father knew you were only good for one thing, being useful. He put you in charge because he knew Mark was meant for greatness, and you were meant to serve it. Now stop being a selfish child and be useful. Something inside me didn't just break. It turned to ice. Her words, meant to wound me into submission, did the opposite. They set me free. For 10 years, I had been shackled by a promise to a dead man. But in that moment, I saw the truth. I wasn't honoring my father. I was a prisoner in a cage built by my mother's greed and my brother's entitlement. I looked at their expectant, smug faces and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold, hard clarity. I straightened up and said, my voice eerily calm, "You're right. It's what Dad would have wanted. I'll get you the money." The relief on their faces was immediate. My mother patted my arm, her condescending smile returning. "I knew you'd see sense, dear." Mark clapped me on the back. "Attaboy, Liam. I knew I could count on you." They thought they had won. They had no idea they had just lost everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I went down to the garage, to the corner where my father's old workshop effects were stored in dusty cardboard boxes that my mother had never bothered to touch. She had kept his prized watch and his wedding ring, but his life's work, his papers, his very essence, she had relegated it all to the spiders and the damp. I started digging, not knowing what I was looking for. I just had this burning need to understand the man who would put such a heavy burden on one son while giving the other a free pass for life. At the bottom of a box filled with old engineering textbooks, I found a worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't his work log. It was personal. Tucked into the back sleeve was a sealed envelope with my name, Liam, written in my father's familiar, steady hand. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. It wasn't a long letter. It spoke of his love for me, his pride in my character. And then it delivered the lines that changed everything. "I have made a terrible mistake, son, not with my business, but with my family. I have enabled your mother and brother for too long, and I have failed to protect you from them. Eleanor, my truest friend, has helped me set something aside for you, a safety net. She holds the key. Don't believe what they will say about her. She is the only one I ever trusted." I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of shock and a decade of misdirected grief. A safety net. His truest friend. Don't believe what they will say about her. My entire reality tilted on its axis. The villain I had been taught to hate was the person my father trusted most. The promise I had upheld so righteously was based on a foundation of lies. The exhaustion from my shift was gone, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. I had to find her. I had to know the truth. The 10th anniversary of his death was in 2 days, and a sudden certain instinct told me where I might find her. She cared for him. My father had said so himself. She would be at his grave. And so 2 days later, I found myself walking up that grassy hill, the lilies in my hand feeling like props in a play I no longer understood. And there she was, just as I had pictured. When she looked at me and said, "He would be so proud of you, Liam," the words no longer felt like a violation. They felt like a key turning in a lock. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I stepped forward, my hand shaking slightly as I pulled the worn envelope from my jacket pocket. I held it out to her. "My father left me this," I said, my voice hoarse. "He said you had the key." Eleanor's sad smile deepened. She looked from the letter to my face, and a profound sense of weary relief washed over her features. "I've been waiting 10 years for you to find that, Liam," she said softly. "I promised your father I wouldn't interfere, that you had to come to me on your own." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. "Let's walk. There's a lot you need to know." She began to speak, her voice calm and measured, and with every sentence, she dismantled the world my mother had built around me. "There was no betrayal," she started. "Your father and I didn't have a falling out. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy because of his previous partner. Your father, bless his heart, was a genius inventor but a terrible businessman. He trusted the wrong people." She explained that she hadn't pushed him out. He had begged her to help save what was left. The takeover was a charade they had designed together. The fake takeover was designed to shield the company's real assets, your father's patents, from the creditors of the old, failing entity. He legally transferred his ownership stake to a holding company I controlled, making it look like he walked away with nothing. We stopped near an old oak tree, its branches providing a wide circle of shade. But he didn't walk away with nothing, Liam. I was just the custodian. His shares, his patents, everything of value was placed into a blind trust. A trust in your name. I stared at her, struggling to process the words. A trust? In my name? It made no sense. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why go through all that? Why let me believe the lie? Eleanor's expression was full of sympathy. He was ashamed, she said simply. And he was afraid. He knew your mother and Mark. He knew if they had any idea there was money left, it would be gone within a year. He saw how they treated you, how they relied on you. The lie was his desperate, broken way of trying to protect his legacy from them. He wanted the company he built to grow, to become something, not to be drained away to pay for your brother's whims. She then delivered the final ground-shattering blow. He put a 10-year hold on the trust, or until you came to me with that letter. He wanted you to be old enough and independent enough to handle it. He never could have predicted you'd make that promise and spend the decade funding them yourself. She reached into her purse and handed me a crisp business card. It was for a high-end law firm downtown. The company we saved, Liam? It's now called Apex Innovations. It's a leader in its field. The trust holds your father's original 51% stake. It's currently valued at a little over $15 million. The number just hung in the air. Unreal. $15 million. I wasn't just not poor. I was the majority owner of a major company. I felt a dizzying wave of anger, grief, and a terrifying, liberating sense of power. The years I had lost, the life I had sacrificed, it was all for a lie. But the lie had just handed me the sword I would use to reclaim my life. My conversation with Eleanor in the cemetery was the end of one life and the beginning of another. The next morning, I called the lawyer. His name was Mr. Harrison, and he spoke to me not as a grieving son or a construction foreman, but as a client, as an owner. That afternoon, I sat in a plush leather chair in a glass-walled office overlooking the city, the kind of place I only ever saw from the street below. Mr. Harrison calmly walked me through the trust documents, the corporate structure of Apex Innovations, and the portfolio statements. It was all real. The numbers on the page were staggering. By the time I left, I had signed the papers that officially gave me control of my inheritance. I was no longer just Liam, the scapegoat's son. I was Liam Callahan, the majority shareholder and chairman of the board. My first act wasn't to buy a sports car or a mansion. I went to a dealership and bought a brand new top-of-the-line pickup truck, paying for it in cash. It was a practical purchase, but it was also symbolic. It was the chariot that would carry me into my new war. That evening, Eleanor and I met for dinner. I laid out my feelings, the anger, the sense of betrayal, but underneath it all was a cold resolve. I don't just want to cut them off, I told her, my voice steady. I want them to understand what they've done. I want everyone they care about to know who they really are. Eleanor nodded, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. "Your father would understand," she said. "He was too kind for his own good. Sometimes, justice needs a firmer hand." And so, we devised a plan. Mark's engagement party was the perfect stage. It was their moment of ultimate triumph, funded by my decade of sacrifice. It would become the site of their public execution. I went home that night and found my mother and Mark watching television, not having even noticed I was gone all day. I put on the performance of a lifetime. I slumped my shoulders, adopted a defeated look, and told them I had figured it out. "I took out a massive loan," I lied, enjoying the flicker of contempt in their eyes. "I leveraged everything, but I have the money for the wedding." I handed my mother a cashier's check for $50,000. "Go all out. You deserve the best." As for the house down payment, I told them I'd have the check ready for them at the party. "I want to present it as a special gift in front of all your new friends." They beamed, their greed blinding them completely to the trap being laid. The 2 weeks leading up to the engagement party were a masterclass in my family's arrogance. My mother and Mark bled the $50,000 dry with impressive speed. They booked the most expensive venue, hired the most sought-after caterer, and bought clothes that cost more than my monthly rent used to. My mother would send me photos of flower arrangements and ice sculptures with giddy captions like, "Tiffany's parents are so impressed." Mark called me once, not to thank me, but to complain that the brand of champagne the venue offered wasn't exclusive enough. They were so high on their own self-importance, so convinced of their victory, that they never once stopped to question it. While they were busy playing the part of the wealthy elite, I was quietly learning how to be the man my father had trusted me to become. I spent my days with Eleanor and Mr. Harrison. I toured the Apex Innovations headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass. I met the executive team, who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. I read every file, every report, absorbing the history of the company my father had founded and that Eleanor had masterfully stewarded. For the first time, I felt the weight of a true legacy, not the false burden of my family's needs. I was building myself up while they were planning a party. On the night of the event, I pulled my new truck into the valet line at the Grand Oak Ballroom. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a simple, dark, well-tailored suit. I looked respectable, but not rich. I wanted to be underestimated until the very last second. Inside, the ballroom was dripping with my money. A string quartet played in the corner, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My mother, draped in a glittering gown, rushed over to greet me. "Liam, you're here. Come, you must meet Tiffany's parents." She dragged me over to a stiff-looking couple, introducing me as my wonderfully supportive son, Liam. He works in construction, you know. Such a hard worker. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "There he is. The man of the hour. Don't worry, bro. I'll pay you back someday," he said with a loud, performative laugh. I just smiled, a calm, knowing smile that they mistook for simple-minded devotion. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to spring it. After a series of painfully generic toasts from Tiffany's relatives, Mark finally took the stage, his chest puffed out with pride. He thanked Tiffany's parents, gushed about his perfect fiancée, and then turned his attention to his grand finale. "Of course," he said into the microphone, his voice booming across the ballroom, "none of this would be possible without the incredible support of my family, especially my little brother, Liam." He gestured toward me, and a warm spotlight settled on my table. He has sacrificed so much to make my dreams come true, and I hear he has one last surprise for us tonight. Liam, Why don't you come up here and give us that very generous housewarming gift you promised? A polite round of applause rippled through the room. My mother was beaming, her eyes wet with phony tears of pride. This was her moment, proof of her family's devotion. I stood up and walked calmly to the stage, my heart beating with a slow, steady rhythm. I felt no fear, only a chilling sense of purpose. I shook Mark's hand and took the microphone. "Thank you, Mark," I began, my voice clear and even. "It's true. I do have a gift for you." I reached into my suit jacket, and I could feel the collective anticipation of the room. They were all expecting a giant novelty check. Instead, I pulled out a single, folded document. But before I give it to you, I want to tell everyone a quick story about family, sacrifice, and lies. A confused murmur went through the crowd. My mother's smile tightened. You see, for the last 10 years, I've been the sole provider for my mother and brother. I worked endless hours to pay their bills, fund Mark's failed business ventures, and eventually to pay for this beautiful party. I did it because I promised my dying father I would take care of them. They told me he died a penniless, broken man, betrayed by a business partner named Eleanor Vance. I paused, letting the name hang in the air. They told me I was their only hope. That was a lie. I looked directly at my mother and Mark, whose faces had begun to drain of all color. My father didn't die poor. He died wealthy. And the business partner he supposedly hated, she was his most trusted friend. She helped him protect his assets and his company, a company now known as Apex Innovations. I saw a flash of recognition in the eyes of Tiffany's father. My father left his entire estate, his controlling 51% interest in that multi-million-dollar corporation, to me, in a trust that I claimed 2 weeks ago. The room was dead silent. I unfolded the paper in my hand. So, Mark, this is my gift. This isn't a check for your house. This is an eviction notice. Our family home, which I now own, is being sold. You both have 30 days to vacate. Thank you all for coming. Please, enjoy the rest of the party. It's the last thing I'll ever be paying for. I didn't wait for the applause. I placed the microphone back on its stand, gave a slight nod to the stunned string quartet, and walked off the stage. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a heavy, shocked vacuum. It was broken by a single, horrified gasp from Tiffany. I glanced over at her table. She was staring at Mark, her face a mask of pale disgust, as if she had just discovered he was made of spiders. Her father, the prominent businessman, was looking at my brother with the kind of cold contempt reserved for a particularly bad investment. The dream was over. The merger had failed. Then the chaos erupted. "He's lying!" my mother shrieked, finally finding her voice. Her face was a twisted, blotchy mess of fury. "He's insane! Making up stories to ruin his brother's special day." Mark, white-faced and trembling, stumbled down from the stage and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in like claws. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice cracking. "You ruined everything." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked from his desperate face to my mother's. "It's over," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "The trust is real. The company is real. The eviction is real. You should have thought about that when you told me my only purpose was to be useful." I pulled my arm free from Mark's grasp with ease. He was weak, a hollow man who had never had to fight for anything in his life. I turned and walked toward the grand exit, the sound of my mother's continued hysterics and the frantic whispering of the guests fading behind me. Near the doors, leaning casually against a marble pillar, was Eleanor. She had watched the whole thing from a distance. She didn't smile, but she gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of approval, of vindication, a silent acknowledgement that the promise my father had made to her to see his son protected had finally been fulfilled. I walked out into the cool night air, got into my truck, and drove away, not once looking in the rearview mirror. My phone began to light up, buzzing incessantly with calls and texts. I silenced it and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The noise was finally over. It's been 6 months since that night. The fallout was exactly as swift and total as I had intended. The engagement was called off before the caterers had even cleared the tables. Tiffany's family, mortified by the scandal and Mark's sudden poverty, vanished from his life without a second thought. I heard through the grapevine that Mark, stripped of his charm and unearned confidence, now works stocking shelves at a grocery store on the night shift. He tried calling me for a while, leaving rambling, pathetic voicemails that swung between begging and cursing. I never listened to them in full. I just deleted them. My mother was the most resistant. She refused to leave the house until the sheriff physically posted the notice on the door. She moved into a small, grim apartment on the other side of town. All the prominent friends she had worked so hard to cultivate now crossed the street to avoid her. They have been left with nothing but the truth of who they are. As for me, I sold the family home and never looked back. I moved into a modest condo downtown, close to the Apex Innovations headquarters. Eleanor has become the mentor and friend I never knew I needed. She guides me through the complexities of the business world, and I've discovered I have more of my father in me than I ever realized. I have a mind for his work, for the logic of engineering and design. Last month, I enrolled in night classes at the university, finally pursuing the engineering degree I put on hold a decade ago. It feels like coming home to a part of myself I thought was lost forever. I am the chairman of the board, but I am also a student. For the first time, my identity isn't defined by my usefulness to others, but by my own potential. Sometimes, I visit my father's grave. There's no anger left, no sense of betrayal. I place fresh blue hydrangeas by the headstone and feel a quiet sense of peace. The promise I made to him was a terrible burden, born of his own weakness and fear. But in the end, it was the crucible that forged me. He wanted me to be strong enough to survive my family. He just never imagined I would have to destroy them to do it. I am no longer the scapegoat, the machine that produces money, or the dutiful son. I am just Liam. And for the first time in my life, that is more than enough.